that again, we will not have Father Lawrence Lucas, Noel Leader, and Julian Harper today in the studio, but all is not lost. We have one of the baddest men on the planet here today, from the Southeast, the DMZ, whatever you want to call it. We have Ayo Kimathi, commonly known as the Irritated Genies, in the house.
All right, how you doing, brother?
Good, and what we traditionally do before we get started is that, you know, every week in our history is so replete that something went on in our history at this time. And this week, this was the week where Hannibal crossed the Alps, you know, with 37 elephants and 26,000 men, crossed the Swiss Alps and came backdoor to fight our enemy, which was the state of Rome, or you want to say Italy, but certainly this was the time where he did that. Before we get started, give us some thoughts on what you think of Hannibal.
You know, of course, as any black man, he's one of our greatest heroes. You know,
yes.
And what I loved about him so much, he was offensive. He didn't wait to defend Carthage. He said, look, we already know what's coming. My father fought them. I'm going to do my father's will. I'm going to go in there. And I'm going to say this. Men like yourself in this modern context, men like myself, brothers of today who are out here fighting, we really stand on the shoulders of a brother like Brother Hannibal. And we have no excuse not to do what's right for our people when we have that kind of impossible odds he was facing. They were more impossible than what we're dealing with today. And if he could do that back then,
yes,
and strategize in that way, there's no reason we as black men today can't look at the conditions of our people and do the same thing. So he should be our inspiration.
And so it's safe to say you feel he should be a role model for us.
He should be a role model for every real aggressive black man who believes in standing up for our people. We should constantly remember the name Hannibal of Carthage. Okay,
good, good. Now let's get started. From the outset, we're going to go into the term genocide, what genocide means. Now, last time the Irritated Genie was here, he outlined in a scientific format the foundation of all the world religions. And it took us back to the Nile Valley experience. So you need to see that. You can go to YouTube to see that if you didn't see that before. You know, the conversation was survival in the 21st century, and we'll go into survival in the 21st century again from another level, which will be today genocide. What does genocide mean?
Okay, so it's made up of two parts. Geno, meaning race, and side, meaning to kill. So it means to kill a race or a specific group of people intentionally. Okay,
now, before we go any further with it, when you say intent to destroy, what's an example of that?
Okay. So I tell you what will help. If we talk about it, we'll talk about what the elements of genocide are, and then I'll give examples along those.
Okay, let's go with some examples then.
Okay.
Of what genocide is.
So the first thing is that the first element of genocide by Geneva Conventions, there's an intent to kill, intent to destroy in whole or in part a group of people. Then the second part is the physical aspect. That can be any of five things. So the first of five things is physically killing people. So if you kill a large group of people, even if it's not all of the people, if you kill some of the people, so in other words, if you kill all the doctors in a group, those are the people that heal. If you kill all the educators, if you kill all the women, if you kill all the warriors, that by definition, because you killed a specific number of a particular group in part, in whole or in part, that's genocide. Number two is the intentional bodily harm or causing of serious bodily harm or mental harm. So in other words, if you intentionally give autism to children, you give them chemicals that you know is going to make them incapable physically of thinking properly. Or if people are running away from oppression and you cut legs off and hands off and arms off, and you do this on a substantial basis, that's genocide. If you decide that in order to kill these people, you decide we're going to convince the men that they should be with men, not women, and the women that they should be with other women, because you're messing with their mental health to prevent the birth of that group or the prospering of that group, by definition, of the Geneva Conventions, if it's done intentionally, it's classified as genocide.
You're saying if you prevent childbirth,
That's another one.
whatever type of machination it would be, that's a form of genocide.
That's one of the 5. Yes, another one. If you intentionally prevent the birth of children, that can happen in any number of ways. You can do Planned Parenthood groups that say Planned Parenthood, but you're trying to prevent parenthood by giving them free abortions or inexpensive abortions, or birth control pills with the intent of them not having children. Again, you can encourage them to participate in behavior that otherwise would produce children, except you're telling the men, go mess with little boys, or the women to go mess with females. You're encouraging behavior that you've already calculated that the results of it, they're not going to have births. By definition, that's genocide. Also, number 3 would be calculating circumstances where the end result will be the destruction of the group. So, for instance, you say, hey, we want to get rid of this group. We're not going to physically go and kill them. What we'll do, we'll give them a drug that they become addicted to. We'll give this group guns and this group guns. We'll tell them to fight each other. We'll stand back and facilitate their destruction as they murder one another. If you do that intentionally and you set about creating the circumstances for them to die, put them in a region where there's no arable land so they can't plant food for themselves, and then put in poisonous food and give them a bad diet. If you calculate that this will kill them and do harm to them and destroy the group, that is by definition genocide. And then lastly, if you forcefully take members of the group, the children of the group, and give them to other groups, then that's genocide. So if we look at, many people have seen Charlize Theron. She's an actress from South Africa that's come. She adopted a little black boy and now has tried to turn him into a girl. Many people could easily argue that that meets 4 of the standards. Forcefully taking the children.
Not Theron is a white woman.
Is a white female.
A white actress.
Yes.
Right.
From South Africa, who takes a black child. So you got 4, she'd actually do 4. Forcefully taking children of our race. No black person said, we want to give our child to somebody white to make our son become a girl. That never happened. This was done with intent. Secondly, calculating circumstances to bring about their demise. Well, if you get this boy thinking that he's a girl, he won't be with a woman and be paired with a woman. He won't produce children in a family. He won't protect the black community. It brings about our demise. Also, mental harm. You're causing mental harm to a boy who's supposed to be raised to be a male and to be a strong black man, to be a Hannibal of Carthage. He can never be that because how he's being raised. So, and it prevents births because he's not going to be the woman to produce birth. So you've now taken 4 of the 5 things, all except the physical murder of that young boy. Could be argued that in that case, that is an example of genocide, particularly when we see it happening over and over again.
So you're saying if you culturally divorce him from his race, or you culturally divorce him from his natural progression to manhood, that's an act of genocide?
By Geneva Conventions, by the very definition, intentionally bringing about mental harm to members of the group. That is serious mental harm.
So would that translate in something as simplistic as putting a dress on a little boy?
Absolutely. Because by African, I have to speak from an African perspective.
Absolutely.
As an African, we have standards for gender behavior for men and males and for girls. These are our standards. We don't negotiate them. We didn't ask anybody what their opinion is.
Right.
Our standards are now being collapsed by outside forces who are calculating the damage that it will cause to our race. And they're doing it by unfortunately getting our leadership to collaborate in the genocidal efforts of our culture as a race of people. And all the people are what they do. How do you define a group of people by? You say, okay, they eat these things. This is how they think. This is how they behave. This is how the men treat the women, how the women treat the Jews. This is how the communities are operated. A people are their culture. That's what makes them a people. And if our culture is being attacked in the very center of what creates the people of the culture, which is life, a black man with a black woman producing black children and black families, by definition, when you intentionally target that construct to change it in the interest of doing things that will prevent births and create serious mental and physical harm to the group, that by definition is genocide.
Okay. Now that we have a workable definition, let's look at a few things. Let's go back to one of the earmarks of European oppression. Let's go back to 1492. And let's start with the Spanish Inquisition.
Yes. Okay, so
when Europeans became a maritime power and started traveling in the water, once they kind of like realized sort of that the world wasn't flat, and they realized that it wasn't a death sentence to get in a boat and travel because Africans helped them with that. But in any event, once they started traveling, what happened?
Well, it's interesting that you say it wasn't a death sentence. It wasn't a death sentence for Europeans.
For Europeans, yes, sir.
But
yes,
unfortunately,
sir.
it became a death sentence for the 500 nations of red people who, again, and people say they weren't all peaceful, they were warring. It's a difference between groups having conflict and fighting with each other and continuing to exist, and an extermination campaign of genocide of groups. When the Europeans left in 1492 and began to say, you know what, we're not going to stay trapped in this region, we're going to expand and push our culture on the rest of the world. Christopher Columbus, he was a Sephardic Jew that was in Italy. He brought ships and ended up in what we call modern-day Haiti. What they did to the people on that island, Hispaniola, what they did on that island was they actually brought in man-eating dogs that they had trained in Europe in their wars against each other, what they call the Dark Ages. So they had a whole history of murdering each other, murdering women, all these type of things they were doing. Now they were exporting this cannibalistic cultural destruction on the red people who had never seen or heard of anything like this. So they began to teach the man-eating dogs to disembowel the men that were rebellious and the people that were doing. They also would feed them the babies. They would go hunt for the Native American babies, and then they would feed them to them because he was trying to get gold, and they had given them all the gold they had, and when they didn't bring any more gold, then it became an extermination campaign.
So would this be the Arawaks and Tianos?
This would be the Arawaks and Tianos, the brothers and sisters. Those people there, many of them are the ones that still exist, can tell you the history even better. We're talking about, and then what people don't realize is because they had a lot of diseases in Europe that the Native Americans were not privy to, they had no immunity for, they killed them through physical conquest and murder and extermination, but also through disease. I mean, just coming in contact with many of the Europeans was enough to kill many of these Native Americans.
You're saying biologically, their bodies weren't suited to take a cough or a sneeze from a European.
They weren't prepared for that. But when they developed the immunity, because Europeans got here and were here for some time, and they were able to resist the initial contact with them, then the Europeans had a second piece.
Okay.
So now we come to North America, because you're talking about the islands where they first landed and committed the kind. If you read the descriptions by Bartholomew de las Casas,
Right.
who was a priest, and it talked about what he witnessed and saw. They had these things called gibbets. They would hang these gibbets to the Native Americans in Haiti. And
what is a gibbet?
A gibbet is a huge wooden instrument that basically you can hang like 13 people at a time on it.
At one time?
At one time. They put 13 of them up there, hang them, disembowel the stomach so that the dogs can eat the guts and things of that nature out, and then take another 13 up there and put them up there and kill them.
So this is a form of torture?
This is a form of torture, murder, and terrorism to make the people know, go get us more gold and do what we say.
So you're saying that the early Europeans had that they might have called conquistadors or whatever were terrorists?
Absolute terrorists. There's not even a question about it, even by definition of their own behavior. They're worse than any form of terrorism that we know today.
Worse than any form. So you're saying that European aggression is the greatest form of terrorism on the planet?
Yes, I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to tell you how I realized it. I was looking just in general, how the whole lecture we did, Genocide, They've Come to Kill Us, how that came about. I was looking at the murder of the Native Americans, looking at what's happening to our people today, look at what happened to the Tasmanian brothers and sisters, just looking around the world, the nuclear bombs that have been dropped on everybody. And I said, I want to, and I wasn't looking to do a lecture. I said, I want to look up genocide. So I went on to Google, and this was some years ago, maybe 10 years ago, and I said, maybe Yahoo, one of them search engines, and I said, genocide. And it came up with the top genocidal maniacs in history. And it started with Mao Zedong. And I was like, what? And I went down the list, and I think they had Stalin was on there. There were no Europeans. It was Pol Pot and all these non-Europeans. And I said, are you serious? I said, wow. I said, the history and the modern context of what genocide is and why even a term exists for it is being, the narrative is being changed so that it looks like genocide is something that's done by anybody other than whites. I said, this is not true. And I said, well, who's telling the story? And I realized something that Baba Kwesi, the master teacher, used to tell me. Because I would say, Baba, you need to do this, and you need to do that. And he said, son, I'm doing my work. He would say it politely to me because, there's a lot of love there. But he'd say, maybe you should do it. And he would tell me a lot of these things because I saw his work, and I was like, you the best at it. And when I thought about that, I said, I'm going to do what Baba says. I'm going to do a lecture about genocide to give the proper narrative so people know when they look it up online, the narrative, and they say genocide, they'll have a product that they can look and say, okay, now I understand what genocide is and who has perfected it, who has given it a name and a title and actually created something for us to study in the way of a narrative of genocide and what it is. It's not reasonable to go to anybody but Europeans in this particular discussion.
Now, you're describing what happened on Hispaniola, but that sounds eerily the same thing that happened in Mexico.
That's so true. If you look, there's a video called 500 Nations, and it does an outstanding job of outlining the genocide of what had to happen in order for America to be born, and for South America to be in the condition it's in today. And what you will find is story after story of individuals like Christopher Columbus and the rest of the conquistadors of absolute, unimaginable murder, extortion, torture, and violence, the likes of which may not really have a parallel in the history of the world.
Because there came a time when Cortez knew that his men just coughing on Native Americans, commonly called Mexicans today. He saw that when they coughed on them, or if they raped them and had sex with them, that woman died shortly thereafter. So he knew, but his quest for gold, that overzealousness for gold, he could care less about how many native aborigines were being killed.
What we have to understand is that during what they call the Black Ages, but really we call it the White Ages, when the Europeans were murdering each other, we have to understand something. If we study what they did to one another, they used to take women and pierce them through their vaginas on these spikes.
Now, that's called an impala, right?
Impaling, yes.
Now, it's interesting, when I saw that term, I said, that's the character that Dracula came out of.
Vlad the Impaler.
Vlad the Impaler. So, explain that.
So, in the 7th century A.D., there was an individual named Vlad the Impaler. And he became notorious and known for, he would go to war and kill people, and then he would sit at dinners and have whites, Europeans sitting around him, and they would sit at dinner, and he would sift the men through their anus all the way, spike through their head, and impale them.
So they'd be in a sitting position.
Yeah, they sitting eating dinner.
Right.
He's sitting with his folks eating dinner.
Right.
And then he has his men to put these prisoners through their anus, through their head on these spikes.
And it would go through their entire body up to their head.
And he would just sit around and listen to them screaming and moaning. And the reports say in the history that when one of his men one time said something about it and complained about it, he put him up on one of them.
This is Cortez?
No, this is Vlad the Impaler.
Right, Impaler, right. Yes, sir, yes, sir.
So what I'm saying is, this is what Europeans were doing to each other. So what we have to understand, this idea that the Euro-Asiatic, the Asiatic from that landmass, whether it's Europeans, Arabs, or whatever the case may be, are going to have some type of empathy for the life of African people or Native Americans or someone else, we're off mentally. Because if they did this to one another, and they did, and quite frankly, the reason is the 1492, some people have to ask the question, was it good that the Moors went in during those dark ages? The reason I say that is this. They were slaughtering each other in this manner before the Moors went in. The Moors brought science, mathematics, bathing. These things were not things that were being done in Europe. They were systematically exterminating each other.
You're saying before the Moors brought in public baths that Europeans didn't wash?
Dentistry, no. In fact, in France, they would brag that I've taken a shower only once this year. Mama Kwesi...
is that based on June weddings, that you would get married, if you were getting married in June, you would bathe for that year in June?
There's a book called Dirt, and if you read the book called Dirt, Mama Kwesi in her lecture on fashion talks about it and just gives the history. I didn't know this stuff. I learned it from her. We find that there's some very interesting history, but the point being This is what they did for themselves. It wasn't until we introduced some other things that they incorporated bathing and these type of things that we see that, that they pretty much do
That's
today.
from the Moors.
That's from the Moors.
Right.
And I'm not saying that it was a good thing that happened because, quite frankly, that period stopped them from killing each other. And that's how 1492 happened. They decided, you know what, we're sick of these black folks, who had some Arabs up there too, but mostly black folks in Southern Europe. We want them out of here. They pushed the Moors out. And when they pushed them out, the Moors, for whatever reason, decided we want to destroy West Africa, which would have seemed impossible at the time because you had some powerful kingdoms there. And so the British said, we don't want them, and the other groups of Europeans said, the Moors are out now. After the Spanish Inquisition, it was about putting the Moors out. It wasn't about traveling around the world. It was about getting these guys out of here.
Now, the Moors were there for, what, 8 centuries?
For yes, like from the 700s to like 1492.
And the advantage was that during that period, they learned science, math, the written word, also navigation, certainly for the seas, and just everything one could imagine was given. They were enlightened.
They were enlightened, and I'll be honest. I mean, people have their different opinions, but it might have been better if that hadn't happened, because what they've done with that information is not create a better world where there's more running water and more toilets and more of these things. They've created a world where there's more suffering.
Absolutely.
So they've used those things that we gave them, and now they've turned those things into weapons against people. They went to China and saw gunpowder that was used to do fireworks and said, hey, wait a minute. We don't have to shoot this thing up in the air. We can shoot something through you.
Right.
And they made guns, and the rest is history.
Okay, so we're talking about European aggression.
Yes.
That started during that period in the 1400s, and it ill-affected the entire world. Is that safe to say?
It is. It's fair to say.
Okay.
Now, to be clear, it is not that the Arabs had not been doing something similar and just as dangerous in Africa for hundreds of years, even prior to that, but it's to say that the level that, some people would argue that the Arab slave trade of African people was just as bad as the European. Some would say it was worse. So let's just say, for us that's in the Western Hemisphere, our story from our African perspective of going through the Atlantic slave trade, if we look at it from that perspective, it's one of the worst periods in the history of the known world.
Okay, is it safe to say that European aggression would not have been as effective had not Arab intervention broke the back of certain borders and destabilizing African communities all over the continent of Africa? So by the time the Europeans got there, Africa was in a more weakened state.
That's absolutely the case. And there's another piece that we don't like to talk about, and I don't like to talk about it, but it's only appropriate. I saw your program from 2 weeks ago, and let me just say, and I mean this, but I don't give out accolades. People say I do interviews all the time. I don't give people accolades. Brother, the way you went on these collaborators in this modern time, that's what we need from black men. I showed real warriors that I know who've been around for decades fighting for our people. That interview, they went nuts. They said, where are the black men like this? One thing we don't like to talk about, it was not only that the Arabs decimated the infrastructure of Africa to the degree it opened up for the European slave trade, but they also helped develop an organized group of collaborators who collaborate against the interests of African self-sufficiency, which right now, if there's any time that would be relevant, in the black community, and I travel the world. Now, I haven't been to Asia yet, but I've been to Europe, so that's Asia. I haven't been to South America, but everywhere that I've been, one of the primary reasons that black people are suffering is not just the white oppression or the Arab oppression. The collaborators, including America here, the collaborators.
And Canada.
The black-skinned individuals that look like you and I, but whose heart and spirit, it does not resonate with our self-sufficiency. The ones who will take money to sell us out. The ones that would take money to do harm to us. The ones that don't even get paid, but just do it because they have such self-hatred and such idolatry of our enemies and our adversaries that to get proper reception for them or what they think will be a benefit from them, they will do harm to us. They are doing as much damage to our people in this moment as the Euros and Asiatics. And I say that because there's enough black people who don't like the genocidal things that are happening in our community that want to do something. But the problem is they don't have access. They don't have access to media. They don't have access to money. They don't have access to the places of power, the doors to power in any community. And it's been intentionally done where the whites in this country have put homophiles, homosexuals and pedophiles, and other integrationist collaborators, those that are interracially dating and married and things of that nature. They put them in position of power.
Are preachers in that also?
Preachers are in that. And many, not just some, it's not just Eddie Long. Don't get that confused.
Right.
Many of these preachers, particularly the mega preachers, listen to me. The reason they are mega preachers because they were orchestrated. Remember faith-based initiative, FBI, under Bush administration. We didn't understand what was happening at that time. I actually lived through the process. I was involved in physical altercations. We didn't know what was happening at the time. But what was happening is that the infrastructure for black people where we go that houses our spirit, that we go and get re-energized is the church. That's just the truth in America. That's where we tend to go. What they realize, if they want to get us to accept genocidal behavior that will kill our people and make us powerless to defend ourselves, they have to dethrone men and take away the strong, aggressive black men who won't tolerate foolishness. How do they do it? The best weapon that they've ever found in the history of the world is homophilia. The rape, the brutalization of men, the stripping of the man's sense of protecting women, protecting children. And so faith-based initiative, from my investigation, was an economic effort to get the black church to open the door to the acceptance of homophilia, the rape of children, and homosexuality to black men, women, and children. And it's been very effective. And if you look at these mega preachers and you talk to people who know, the mega churches are replete with people molesting children and raping children, homosexual males, lesbian females, all under the guise of a religion that strictly forbids the same behavior.
Now, I understand what you're saying with respect to the church and this aggressiveness. Now, Europe on its own, whether it's France, Belgium, Germany, Spain, Italy, Portugal, these countries, in a sense, did not have the manpower to colonize various African countries independently without collaborators.
That's right.
So when you say collaborators, England wouldn't have the manpower theoretically to control India. When India was one country, before it was India and Pakistan, when it was one country, they would not have the manpower. They would not have the manpower to go into Ghana or Nigeria and have the amount of patrols and security to control the infrastructure. So when you say collaborators, what exactly are you talking about?
I'm talking about black people who can either have positions of power or will be given positions of power on the condition that they will do whatever their white or Asiatic slave master demands that they do to keep black people oppressed. So you get someone like Mobutu Sese Seko in Zaire, which we now call Congo. So he goes in, Patrice Lumumba and that group is saying, we're going to take control of the wealth of this region, which is really the wealth of the world.
It's the wealthiest, minerally rich country in the world. With all they've been raping it for the past century, it still has more mineral wealth than literally the entire world.
That's right. And so we had brothers and sisters who said, we've taken control of this, we're going to take control again. And it would have been difficult for them at that time to just go in and send an army in to kill them because Africa was waking up. All they had to do was find one collaborator who had a position of power, Mobutu, get him to murder our great brother, and then threaten the other leaders who were following the brother at that time. And then they were able, essentially, to destroy the growth and development of that nation to this very day.
Right. Now, I've talked to Dr. Jeffries about this, and he described basically what you said, that Patrice Lumumba had the intent, he had the ideas, but he did not have the wherewithal to unite everybody at that time. And the Europeans understood you can't unite all that we've broken apart that quickly.
You know what's very interesting, and this is I haven't read this, but I got this from one of the tour guides in Ghana, who was, because I was so interested in Kwame Nkrumah, he was breaking down his life. And what he told me, I didn't know this. He said that Kwame Nkrumah was so invested, this is what he told me, in the life and the safety of Brother Lumumba, that he sent his general to protect him. But his general loafed off and messed around and didn't get there in time to do what he had commissioned him to do. And that's why Kwame Nkrumah got upset with him. And because he got upset with and I don't know the exact history, but that's the way I understood it. He got upset with him. That's where he ended up getting ousted by the same guy, because he had actually said, go down there and make sure nothing happens to him. So again, in this case, it may not have been a direct collaborator, but like David Walker said in the book, what's David Walker's book? David Walker's Appeal. He said, we got these blockheads. He was talking about how there were some brothers that had gotten a chance to escape slavery, and they let the slave master live. It's like, what are you doing? We got to get free. We have to be serious. If we're serious, we make a move, then you finish the job. And we can't be fumbling. We talked about Hannibal. We can't fumble on the 1 yard line. You know, we have to say, hey, when we're serious about things, we got to finish them. And who knows what would have happened if the Ghanaians had gotten there to protect Patrice Lumumba in that time, or any other group of African people had done that. The course of African history would have been changed in this day.
Now, he's talking about the great Asajifu, Kwame Nkrumah, who led his country, Ghana, to liberation, was the first country in Africa to do that. Now, and he was eventually ousted by a CIA coup also. Now, it's interesting that you're saying that he sent one of his top generals to protect Patrice Lumumba. Patrice Lumumba was a nationalist. He was a Pan-Africanist, just like Kwame Nkrumah and so many others. And at that time, they really got so much of that information from here. Right. From the blacks here in America. They were inspired by the writings here in America, and certainly Marcus Garvey was among the people that they read. And they read things by Martin Delany and so many others that inspired them towards freedom. And it's just interesting that you're saying that had he protected that brother, because that's the richest country by far in the world, that had they had the proper unity, there's no way in the way the Belgians could take over that country.
It wouldn't happen like
so that. Let's go back to 1884, 1885,
yes.
The Berlin Conference, and explain how Africa was carved up.
Yes. So again, in 1884, 1885, the Berlin Conference was called. The Berlin Conference was the Chancellor of Bismarck, the Chancellor of Germany, was contacted. Really, it was by the Portuguese. Really, most people don't know that. He was asked to do this, and so he called the European nations together and said, "Look, we're doing a lot of fighting. We're fighting each other. Let's stop. Let's concentrate on economic development through the rape of the African continent. Let's sit down in a very calm manner and figure out, France, what do you want? England, what do you want? Germany, this is what we want." The U.S. was there, didn't go and take any of the country. They just wanted to hold on to Liberia. And the Russians were there. They didn't particularly take any countries, I don't believe, at that time. But all the European nations, most of them sat there and made a decision. These are the different countries that we want. We're going in, and our rules are simple. We won't sell guns to the Africans to fight against each other. And they had one more rule. They had like 2 rules. And they would do, you take your region, that's up to you, and then we won't fight amongst each other. So, of course, the Belgians, who wanted the rubber, because they were becoming rich with the rubber, so they loved that Congo region, and they extended the boundaries that they had there, and that's how Belgium was able to really enrich itself.
Now, a country like Congo is not on any coast. So Africans would have to lead you there because you can't get there by boat. So they literally had to invite you in and bring you in for you to witness that they had rubber trees there.
What is happening to our people, and it's kind of a repeat of history, our ignorance and foolishness and naivety in wanting to have friends outside of our own race. The truth is, not only do we not have a lot of friends outside of our race, but inside of our race, we have people that are not friends. And our love for others, that Dr. John Henry Clarke talks about is a huge problem. When we love others more than we love ourselves, is a tremendous problem, because this lie that we tell to ourselves that we have friends in other races commits us to our own destruction by inviting them in to see the wealth that we have, and then invariably, there has not been an instant when it has not occurred, where then they come and try to take that wealth and take the riches of the culture, the wealth, our women, our families, our construct, our religious beliefs, everything. It's a cultural cannibalism where they come in and just eat us and destroy us, and then we got to start producing the Hannibals of the world, or the brother Mike Grays out there that's going to go out there and fight for our people. We wouldn't have to produce that if we would stop believing that these people are anything other than what they were, which is why Hannibal is so appropriate to talk about. Hannibal had seen what the Romans had done to other groups.
Yes.
He had seen his father fighting them, not because...
Punic Wars.
Yeah, the Punic Wars. He had seen Amilcar Barca, his father, peace be upon him, fighting them. And what he said was, why would I wait for the Romans to come here? It makes no sense. I know their character. I know their behavior. Their culture would not be amenable to our culture. Those men like little boys. We like our women. That's not going to work. I'm getting elephants. I'm going. It wasn't that complex. It was, these are not going to be our friends. And if they're not going to be our friends, why should I wait? I have the army now. I have the strength now. I shouldn't be looking for friends. I'm looking to make peace for my people and have safety for my people for a time.
So that was a survival move.
It was a survival move. It was a constructive move that really when we look at the Hannibal War, really from my assessment, the major place it went wrong was, again, it goes to our spirit as people. Hannibal was an absolute warrior. He killed every Roman warrior in front of him.
Absolutely.
But when they got to the city, what people don't realize, his army was so incredible, they were just slaughtering the Romans to the point that the army would find out where he was, and instead of meeting him to fight, they got to the point where they would just run.
That's a war of attrition.
Right.
When you retreat strategically, you destroy all the food, foliage in that area, so he doesn't have reinforcements, and so you just back up, and even though he's killing everything in sight, however, he doesn't have the proper reinforcements. You know the terrain. He doesn't. He's moving forward towards Rome, and you falling back. So the few Africans that you killed, it adds up without reinforcements.
And that's right. That's one part. And then two, just on a practical level, they were scared. They're like, we can't beat him. So see, this is what we as Africans were not used to. We never heard of an army that would leave the main city and flee and leave the citizenship to just be slaughtered.
Right.
But he wasn't a citizen slaughterer. He's an African. So when he gets to the doors of Rome, he's not prepared to just go kill people in their houses and doing stuff.
Civilians, yeah.
Civilians. I mean, I hate to say it, but if you're going to take the war, in retrospect, this is looking at it now. As an African, we would all say the same thing. But he literally, in one move, if he had sacked the city of Rome, they would have no reinforcements. They would have nowhere to go get food or anything. Their whole bases would have been sacked and destroyed. And had he done that, had he been able to do that, there would be no discussion about Rome. It would have just been some city that was sacked by the great Carthaginians, and then he would have expanded his empire in type of way. The world would be a whole entirely different place. I'm not being overly critical, but I'm just saying,
no doubt.
Our respect for life, our respect for life, that's kind of cost us sometimes.
Oh, it's no question about it. Now, you said that you described that Berlin conference like it was a chessboard, and that with pieces on the board, and that these demonic, aggressive people was in agreement. How did they agree? How did they agree not to fight each other, but to fight others? And how did that happen?
Because they came to the consensus that we still have not, but we're trying to now, and I'm very proud of our people come to, that it's about race. They said, you know what, French, I don't like Germans. We don't like each other. English, we don't like, we don't like each other. But you know what? We don't like these blacks more. And we can make an agreement that our whiteness supersedes our difference with each other. We'll fight each other when we decide we want to, but never to the detriment of any of these nations against these groups. And so they sat down, and I would look at it like a pizza. It was a pizza with all different types of stuff. You got some pepperoni pizza, then you got some cheese pizza, then you got some with onions and green peppers. So the vegetarians said, we want the vegetarian one. So, so look, this is going to be our slice of the pie. And what they did, they literally looked at the mineral resource base and what they wanted, what they were doing at that time, what they thought that they could take those resources and do something to uplift and economically build their nation. And they said, that's the country I want. Well, they didn't say that's the country. Let me stop. They did something even deeper. Africa was kingdoms. It was built with different
Right.
kingdoms that were in different places. And those
Right.
kingdoms respected each other because
Right.
they had to, because everybody could fight. They said, we're going to draw lines not based around the kingdoms, which would be the natural division of the African continent, not even the natural barriers. We're going to draw about, I want that pepperoni. And if that pepperoni crosses this two groups or splits in the middle of these groups, we're going to split it, and this becomes my part for France, and this becomes my part for Germany, and this becomes my, whatever, I like
Belgium,
sausages.
yeah.
I like sausage. I'm going to take the sausage slices right there. Those are my slices. And that's how they divided the African continent up and created new, the names of the countries we hear now and the borders that we see, those are not borders that were created by African people.
Superficial
not one country
borders,
there.
yeah.
Those countries were created by Europeans that said, these are the resources that we want.
Okay, while you saying that they conquered and slaughtered, you haven't mentioned any numbers yet. Give me some numbers.
I'll give you one just to get an example, because the one place, because when they're killing, there was no benefit in them calculating how many of us they're killing because it was savage. But in the Congo, because others were jealous of Leopold
Right.
and how much wealth Belgium was getting, to show how wrong it was, they calculated the numbers of how many of our people they killed. And it calculated to over 30 years, it was like 10 million people. And when you actually do the math to look at it, it was something to the effect of 38 people per hour for 30 years. So imagine 38 people per hour, per day, per week, per month, per year for 30 years.
So you're talking about hundreds of people were killed every day. In one day, it was hundreds, and that translated into thousands by the end of the week. And then we're talking about eventually 10 million.
The amount of genocide and murder, and understand, we're not talking about poisoning their wells. We're not talking about African people who got diseases like the Native Americans and died with attrition in that sense. We're talking about, we're going to pay these black people, and if they don't do it, we'll kill them. You go out, you hunt black people, and bring me back hands to prove it.
Wait. Are you saying at this day and this time that the white man didn't take their word when they gave them weapons? In other words, you had to come back with proof that you killed X number of Africans daily.
You had to come back daily, and for you not to be fired or killed, you had to prove that you killed in order for you to get paid.
So these are
the
hands. So you had to, a pair would mean you killed.
You killed the hands. You have to smoke them so that they stay good, so that then you can show that here's some black people that I killed. So if you come back with baby hands, okay, you killed some babies, good, all right, let me pay you. You killed some women, okay, that's fine. As a matter of fact, in order to prove that they were killing men, because some of us, I mean, it's sad the condition, but some of our people, and I mean, honest, it was terrorism. Because now, if you say no, we can say, I would have never done that. Okay, you can say no. Right now, in front of everybody, I'm going to slaughter you and kill you. In the worst kind of ways, everybody's going to see what's going to happen. So you either go out there and get me some bodies.
So it's you or him.
And so our people would go out there and do this. And so in the beginning, they were killing women because it's easier to kill women. And they started realizing all these are women hands. No, well, I'm going to prove that you're killing some men. Bring them back so we can actually identify at some point, they weren't bringing back hands. You
so
understand what I'm saying there?
With respect to numbers, Malcolm, without the being able to study it at that time, Malcolm said 100 million. Hakeem Adabuti said 250 million. It seems that every generation that has the luxury to study more, the numbers are going up to 600 million. And some are saying it's close to, if you add up all these centuries, somewhere close to 1 billion Africans have been killed at the hands of European aggression.
Here's the part that we don't talk about. We've begun the process of trying to calculate how many were killed during the Atlantic slave trade.
Yes.
This is what we have to remember. We're talking about two totally different periods of extermination of African people. The Atlantic slave trade proper stopped in 1808. I mean, it went on a little bit longer than that, but proper 1808. We're talking about 1884. So we're talking about an entirely different period. We haven't begun to calculate the numbers, but Dale Jones, in his book Black Holocaust and Black Holocaust 2000, excellent research material, you need to get it. He talks about in Namibia how many people were killed, and he said something like 10 million or something, or 20 million. I don't remember. The number was so horrible that when you realize like 17 million people over the course of, it was some years that the Germans were exterminating, and it got to the point where the German...
So Germans stated exterminated Africans long before supposedly Jews were exterminated?
And the numbers not even First of all, many people argue that it wasn't 6 million Jews that were killed in the Holocaust.
Some argue that it wasn't even 6 million Jews in Germany, but go ahead.
Right. So I'm not going to even get into that. I'm going to say the number 6 million as an African is like a small number when you're talking about what we face. It was 10 million just in Congo. Dale Jones said, I don't want to give the wrong number, but somewhere in the number of 17 million. But then even talking about the audacity of the murder, the circumstances. He talked about how General von Frother of Germany, at one point, I mean, just think of the arrogance. He said, because our people, the Herero, were fighting back.
And the Herero
warriors, they were fighting back. But the people were so desperate, he said, I will no longer accept women or children as offerings. The Herero will either leave or be hunted like dogs and killed.
So he was claiming Namibia for themselves.
Yes, but
Germans.
For Germans. And he was also letting us know, before then, we were able to offer our women and children to them to spare our lives. That's a hard shot.
Sad commentary.
Because as black men, if these are males that are coming there, and this is what they're doing to our people, and we have to surrender our mothers and daughters to them to stay alive, then at some point we have to say, what does it take for us as black men to put ourselves in a position where no one can do that to us ever again?
Okay, would it be a stretch for me to say that Europeans and Euro-Americans salute these generals that commit these acts and that they are commemorated and that they are part of these statues and in history books? Let's say, for example, General Amherst. There's a city named after him, a university named after him. And what exactly did General Amherst do?
Okay, so we go back to the mid-1700s. We look at Pontiac. Now, again, you can get 500 nations to really get an understanding of this.
Right.
Now, Pontiac, people don't know this. The English were this close from being expelled from this continent. We get this idea that they were so overpowering with their guns and weapons that they were just undefeatable. No. Literally, Pontiac had defeated 9 of the 11 European, British forts, and was on the verge, Fort Detroit and one more, I think Eustis, and it was like, once we get rid of these last forts, we're going to round them up and push them to the eastern seaboard and say, you better never come back home, we'll drown them in the sea. They were this close. It was General Amherst, Jeffrey Amherst, that said, we're not going, I mean, he literally stated, it's clear we're not going to beat them in military warfare because they had stopped fighting each other. They had realized, like black folk, that it doesn't make sense for us to be fighting each other when they're trying to exterminate all of us.
Sir.
So the Native Americans came together and said, forget about tribes. We're red men and women. We're going to stand firm. He said, if we can't beat them in physical battle, we have an alternative. Let's bring them blankets with smallpox in it.
With smallpox? Are you insinuating chemical warfare?
I'm stating, for a documented record in history, General Amherst came up and said, we can't defeat the Native Americans. They're 2 great warriors. We can't beat them militarily. What we'll do now... And
so that wasn't an accident?
He literally said, this is our plan. Maybe what we'll do is we'll give them blankets. And because, again, just like African people, they don't even have they're loving. So even if their enemy comes to give them blankets, they don't say this could be a trick because at that time, the mind of a Native American can't even process that you can put a disease inside of a blanket to kill me. They can't even think that. So what they're saying is maybe they have some civilization in their personality. So they take it. A war that it's not even a question. A war that they had lost. They had really surrendered and they didn't know what they were going to do. Desperate, going to be expelled from this whole continent. They won in about 2 weeks. After 2 weeks and 3 months, literally, his entire army had been wiped out because they took the blankets and literally committed suicide by genocide by taking the death that was given to them the same way African nations now are taking vaccinations. Hundreds of millions in Kenya and East Africa taking these vaccinations don't even understand that you're killing our people so that they can then walk in and take the land at some future date.
So you're saying the Red Cross and all of them that are doing these vaccinations,
well, it's not,
and United Nations,
it's
and
Bill Gates.
Gates, right?
Bill Gates has stated. See, let's understand. Let's be very serious about this.
Is he a eugenicist? But go ahead.
Yeah. His grandfather was a eugenicist. His father was a eugenicist. His whole family was about the science of extermination of black people, okay? Let's just call it what it is.
So
What is
he's not a
eugenics?
computer geek.
He gets on the computer and figure out how you can kill some black folks. So that's my interpretation.
Right.
And here's the thing, though. I'm not talking about what I think. Bill Gates has given speeches where he said, well, there's roughly 8 billion people. That's too many people. We have to get it down to so many billion. So that means we have to depopulate by this many billion. By the definition of the Geneva Conventions, the stated goal he has is by definition genocide. And where does he take his vaccinations? To the only people foolish enough to take death from someone who said that they want to exterminate 6 billion people to the African continent, where we take it and give it to our babies and watch them die and then say, how did we get sick?
So these schools that he's supporting here, when he finances a little black school here in Mississippi or Georgia or here somewhere in New York, that's a smokescreen.
Let me tell you something. Right now, if you do well in school, they'll give you what they call the Rhodes Scholar. Cecil Rhodes
To talk about him.
was a homophile. And I'm not making this, I have it in my book, War on the Horizon, Black Resistance to the Homophile Assault.
Hold that up for a second so people
Yes.
can see it while you're talking.
I'm not making these things up. He was a genocidal maniac who went in and joined with the De Beerses in Southern Africa and wiped out the kind of numbers that we can't imagine. But today, if you do well in school, some Euros will come to you because they want to take your intellectual wealth. Again, we talk about genocide.
Yes.
Doing mental harm. And what they're saying is, if you're brilliant and you're an African, we know that we took the sciences from. We talk about the Moors going in there. We know what your mind can do. We don't want you using that to figure out how to stop us from killing you. So we'll give you money so you come work for us and help us figure out a better, more strategic, streamlined way to kill you.
And that's an honor to go to Oxford
That's an
now
honor.
on a Rhodes Scholarship.
To go to the places named for the people that are most responsible for the extermination of black people. Because without Cecil Rhodes, we could argue that the Berlin Conference may not have happened.
And Native Americans could not countenance and even begin to comprehend the sickness of white aggression. Warriors will go out to do battle, and when they would come back to their village, they would see all the children slaughtered, all the women slaughtered, and they raised the question, who fights like this? They have to be devils. So it wasn't the Nation of Islam that named the white man a devil. Native Americans said it, the native people of Hawaii said it, the Chinese said it, called them all white devils. So
And
if you were around them long enough, you're going to realize you're dealing with devils.
You know, in The Destruction of Black Civilization by Dr. Chancellor Williams, peace be upon him, he put in there that there was a period of time when African people, we said, you know, the devils from the West, that's what we called them. And to be clear what we're talking about, and I think the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, he told in an allegorical fashion, but to make it precise when we talk about devil
Right.
men, what we're talking about are individuals who, by Bobby Wright's description, we would call psychopaths. When we say psychopathology, what we're talking about is an individual who understands the difference between right and wrong. There's nothing stupid about these individuals,
Right.
and we don't understand that we get it wrong. But they're not concerned about that. And so they have a history of being ill-concerned about what is right and what is wrong, but only focus on getting what makes them feel good. And far too frequently, that's creating pain and agony amongst the world's population, not just people. Extermination of animals, pollution of water and air in regions, the demoralization of life in regions across this planet. Nuclear bombs, that doesn't just kill people. It kills animals. It kills livelihood. It kills farmland. It kills a lot of things. And so our people say, you know, this is a group that doesn't understand if you poison that water, you have to drink that. That's not good. So our people say this is something different than
General
us.
Aaron's poisoned water also.
They poison water. So what we realize is that we didn't fight that way because if I poison the water, yeah, I don't like you, but I'm killing the fish too, and the fish are okay. I'm not at war with the fish. I'm
Right.
at war with you, but these individuals think different than us, and at some point, we're going to have to get that through our mind.
Okay, we don't have much time, but we're going to keep going. You're going to be cut off in 3 minutes, but we're going to keep going, so you're going to have to see it on YouTube. Now, describe the Ma'afa. What's the Ma'afa?
The Ma'afa is the term that was coined to describe the great suffering that happened in the Atlantic slave trade as an extension of the Arab slave trade. So it talks about the hundreds of millions of our ancestors who were killed, kidnapped, stripped from their families, murdered, raped, tortured, enslaved, worked from sunup to sundown, and the entire process that occurred to deconstruct basic African civilization in the process of enslaving and building their new world.
Okay, now earlier you mentioned something about, I think you used the term Tasmania.
Yes.
Can you talk about Tasmania or modern day Australia?
Australia, yeah.
But talk about that, please.
There's a small island off the coast of Australia called Tasmania. And what happened to our Tasmanian brothers and sisters was very similar to what happened in the movie called Rabbit Proof Fence that shows the extermination of our Aboriginal brothers and sisters in Australia. But essentially, Tasmania, they were black folk looking just like, I mean, really, you could have been a Tasmanian brother. And so we actually have, like, we can actually see them. And what the British did, which is similar to what they did in America, in, I believe it was Georgia, where they said, look, we got all these criminals in Europe. We got this new continent that we're taking over.
Don't say they flushed the jails. Go ahead.
Say, look, take all our rapists, our murderers, our psychopaths. Go on, you get to get free. All you got to do is go take Georgia and make it someplace where people can live. So when we look at Georgia and some of the regions in the South, the reason we see such violent crime and brutality towards our people over the centuries is because this is who was there. They did the same thing. They emptied the jails for Australia because this was kind of a wild turf. And they said, look, we'll let you out. We're going to give you a hatchet and a knife, but you're going to go over there. And so they went to Australia. And the description, I think it was Brother Ranoko Rashidi who really, I want to give him a lot of credit because
Absolutely.
I think he was the one that I first saw that really gave the descriptive descriptions for us to see what they did to our brothers and sisters. And we were able to calculate down to the last pure-blooded Tasmanian the way they killed. We actually know her name. Her name was Truganini. We actually know who she was. We actually get to see pictures of her. And the torture, the cutting the body parts up, the murdering of families, the killing of the men. They would cut the men's phallus off and let the men run until they bled to death and have a game where they would laugh when this was happening, right in front of the women, and then rape the women in front of the men. These were things that were done systematically in Australia because, again, they emptied the prisons of Europe. So when you see an Australian, you see the descendant of a vile, murderous brute, which is why the kind of torture that they do in the South Pacific now.
Yeah, but I grew up watching a cartoon
Called
about the Tasmanian devil. Can you explain that?
Yes. It's part of the psychopathic process of European personality. What they do, they cannibalize cultures. And it's just, it doesn't attach itself to anything else. This
No,
is
you
their
got to
culture.
explain. What's cannibalizing culture?
Okay, cannibalizing culture means, and I'll explain it, and there's nothing you can compare it to, you just have to study European culture.
Yes.
They go in, they kill. If your army is too strong for them to kill, then they confuse. They get you fighting each other and get you to kill each other. They destroy. They eventually take over and they create great bloodshed and misery. They rape and they torture. They make certain to violate women and children and males. That's what most people don't know. In fact, the French are known, this is in Baba Baruti's book, Homosexuality and the Feminization of African Males. The French are known in warfare. This is what the French are known for. They rape the men first. I'm going to be clear. Among the Europeans, it's not that they rape males because all the European nations do that. It's not that they rape males. Before they rape the women and children, they rape the males.
So the French are distinguished in that their first attack is on males.
When they defeat you, the men will be lined up, we're raping you because we're going to try to strip that if you understand.
Your manhood.
They want to take the manhood. That's why a nation like Haiti produced such real serious warriors because the Haitian, our brothers and sisters that came from the African continent said, you're so vile, we don't have the right to even negotiate with you. You're so vile, we won't negotiate. You don't have the right to, if you read, for people, we really need to read. We read the I Have a Dream speech. I'm going to tell you the speech that our people need to read. The independence speech given by Jean-Jacques Dessalines, the great general, peace be upon him.
Yes, sir.
If you read that speech, it's so eloquent. But he asked the question, because once our people had won in Haiti, we had promised, okay, once we do this, we're going to exterminate the rest of the French army that's here. But then the people, once they didn't want to kill nobody. And he was upset with them. And he said, when will you be tired of breathing the same air with them? He said, the crimes that they've committed are unspeakable. He said, they don't have the right to walk and breathe the same air as us.
That sounds like Martin Delaney when Martin Delaney was approached and asked about what he thought of the Fugitive Slave Act. And he said, if any white man come to my door inquiring about a runaway slave. He said, be he, you know, what did he call him? Constable, not a cop. He called him, whether they be constable, whether they be a judge. He said, whether you are on the Supreme Court, he said, whatever your station in life is. He said, if I don't lay you a lifeless corpse for just asking me about it, he said, then may God refuse me a resting place.
Woo! That's what I'm talking about. The Bookman Duddy said, they asked him if he died and saw his slave master. He said, if I died and woke up in heaven and saw my slave master, I would slay him before the angel Gabriel. He said,
that sounds like Mark Delaney.
Yeah, they said, look, we're going to be free no matter what. And I'm saying part of what we don't realize, particularly in nations that are conquered by the French, it's true for the English as well. But if you really want to talk about the vile nature of brutality, that rape of men and the sadistic nature of the French may be uncomparable to any other nation.
And that helped develop that metal that the Haitians had.
The Haitians said, listen, they had the Haitians had signs that they put up across the whole nation. Every white dog must die. And they wasn't talking about just four-legged dogs.
Right.
John Jack says, I mean, these were amazing people. And the women and the children that fought and sacrificed their lives to say we will be free. The only place in the history of the world that has ever occurred where a people who were taken into captivity in another land have overthrown their oppressors and declared themselves a free and independent nation. Read the Declaration of Independence, 1804, January 1st, by Jean-Jacques Dessalines. That's what our children should be reading in February. They shouldn't be reciting about no dream. They should be reciting about a real freedom fight where we hear what a real black man sounds like when he stood in front of death and walked through the fire and led his people to freedom and independence.
Well, you describing Nat Turner, who told his comrades to keep their heads up. That's the same thing other great brothers who led insurrection said. Right when they was being hung, they looked to their left and right and said, put your heads up. Be proud of what you did. Right. We ain't apologizing.
They asked him, Thomas Gray asked Nat Turner, when he was, Baba Nat Turner, peace be upon him, he asked him when he was interviewing him, he said, you will be crucified for this. He said, didn't Jesus Christ do the same? See, his Christianity was different than whatever's being preached today. His Christianity was, my people going to be free. I'm going to get them to freedom land. And if Jesus is a God we believe in, who gave his life so that we could be free, who am I, Nat Turner, not to be willing to give my life so that my people will be free? If I really say I believe in him, I'm going to live like him. He gave his life to be free. Well, I'm going to give my life, and I'm going to take some with me before I leave.
That sounds like liberation theology.
That's liberation theology. That's real concrete.
Not slave Christianity.
Right. That's when it doesn't matter the words you use to talk about your religion. Your religion is real. I believe that I have the right to be decent, to protect my family and my people, and live on this planet and enjoy the riches of this earth. And if you won't allow me to do it in peace, I won't allow you to do it in peace.
Now, just in terms of strategy, tell me one thing real quick. I know our time is running out, but I got to get to this. What is the difference? Because, you know, the way we're being tricked today, what is the difference in a conservative and a liberal?
A conservative, the best way I can describe it, to make it simple, is an honest Euro who says, I don't like you because you black, and I'm going to hold you down because you black. And if you fight him hard enough, he'll halfway leave you alone. He's always going to be your adversary, but he respects you if you make him respect you, and the only thing he knows is violence. Okay. The liberal is a trickster. Brother Malcolm talked about, he's a fox. He says human rights is what we got to focus on. When really, he's trying to bend you over and turn your daughter into your son and your son into your daughter. Or he's trying to get you to take something to poison yourself to kill your system. He pretends to be your friend. He shakes hands with you, but he strips you of your economic self-sufficiency so that you sit wallowing in misery, so then he can then come in and pay you to defile yourself and give him all your riches. The liberal is a trickster that gets you to commit suicide by believing that his genocidal aims are in your own interest. He tricks you into your own genocide, and then you support him in killing yourself. The conservative has no such aims. He's more honest. He's like, I don't like you. I'm better than you. And the way you deal with them is differently.
Well, is crack a conservative weapon, or is it a liberal weapon?
Crack
or is
would
it
be
both?
Crack would be both, because the conservative says, I want to destroy this community, I'm bringing in crack. It becomes a liberal weapon because the liberal then, once the crack is in our community, will create laws that then pretend and say, we got to stop these hardcore drug dealers that are killing the black community. That's not what he's doing. He's the one bringing the crack in. What he's doing is saying, now that I got you killing your people for me, now I'm going to take it another level and add to that. Now I'm going to take you and re-enslave you, and I'm going to create privatized prisons and an industry of re-enslaving you so that I can get wealthy and rich off your demise.
Is that genocide?
That's genocide by definition.
Oh, my goodness. Well, brother, I want you to quickly, before we go, you just came back from Africa.
Yes, sir.
Could you tell the people where you were and what you did?
All right. Well, I was in Zimbabwe. There's a group called Starlight Global that does a tour to Africa every year, in Europe. And these brothers and sisters from the UK go there, and we meet them with a small straight black pride group. We just make sure people are straight black and proud. And they come with us, and we meet over in Zimbabwe or different African countries, and we go on their trip. And we just enjoy ourselves as Africans. And what I can tell you is this. We're living in a beautiful time. One of the few nations in modern times that represent the pure glory of upstanding African people is Zimbabwe. I'll tell you why I say
Formerly Rhodesia.
Formerly Rhodesia. Baba Mugabe and that regime there that run it, ZANU-PF.
Yeah.
We know that nothing is perfect. But let me say this, because I think it's so important. What Europeans have done with Africa is that they have created their own system of governorship that we call presidents or whatever the case may be, that they have a lot to do with how that system exists. It wasn't the natural system of Africa. The natural system of Africa went like this. If you went out there and fought and created a free society for your people, you became the leader, what we call the king, the ruler. That's how it worked. How did you get it? You got it on the battlefield. Or you got it by taking the nation and creating great economic wealth and development. But usually it happened because you had to fight somebody.
That sounds like the Mau Mau. Go ahead.
That's right. And you had to prove that you were worthy of being a king because you could protect the people. The nation that I would say most I'm talking about the modern context, the last 40 years, that demonstrates that is Zimbabwe. Because the same people who went out there, we learned about Heroes Acre when we go over there. It's called Heroes Acre, where you go there and you see when they were fighting, the British were fighting to prevent Zimbabwe from getting its freedom. It wasn't like some other places where they kind of just walked out. It was a bloodbath. And what they would do, they had us working the mines for them getting the gold and all the resources, but when people would die, they would just stuff them down in these mines and these shafts. And then when people were fighting and resistant, the freedom fighters in Zimbabwe, they would kill them and then throw them down. We're talking about thousands of people. And they tried to kill the people. And so they threw acid and all this kind of stuff to get rid of the bodies.
Right.
But whatever they threw down there actually made the body stiff so that we actually have evidence of it now. And so you see a history of the most heinous. We're talking about in the 80s. We're not talking about like a long time in the 70s.
Right, we're talking about centuries
like
ago.
Since I've been living. I've been born in 1973. We're talking about the 70s, 80s, the 70s at least. And so these are the same men who went out there and said, if we have to kill to get our freedom, somebody going to die. But we're not going to let you make us less than men. We're going to protect our women and children. We're going to take our freedom. And they did it, and they won. And then after that, in the 90s, they said it's time for us to take our land back. But before that, the British said, hey, this homosexuality is a great thing. It had already penetrated through Southern Africa, through South Africa, through Nelson Mandela.
Right.
It had penetrated. And it got...
Which is the neighbor of Zimbabwe.
That's right. It had totally taken over South Africa. And they said, well, we're going... And they figured it would spread through the whole continent. When it got to Zimbabwe, Baba Mugabe said, homosexuality is worse than dogs and pigs. At least dogs and pigs know a male supposed to be the female. He said, it's not our culture. We would never accept it. He said, Zimbabwe in particular and all African nations in general, we chiefs and we people of this continent will not accept this penetrating our nation. And that's when
he became persona non grata.
Him and the nation of Zimbabwe faced sanctions that were it was legitimized under them taking their land back, because after that happened, they already had an agreement with the Lancaster Agreement they could take their land back.
Right.
But then the British said, no, you can't take the land. They said, well, no, we can take it back and give you market value. And at that time, Baba Mugabe needed to do it because the men that had fought said, hey, you said you're giving us land, we're going to get our land.
Yes, sir.
And the British wouldn't honor the agreement. So he said, take your land back. And so what happened is not only did they say no to the 21st century re-enslaving of African people through the new agenda, which is sexual colonialism. It's a sexual agenda to deconstruct the African culture so they can come take whatever they want, because you got a bunch of freaks walking around, no real men who want families and children and want to protect a future for their children. So he said no to that, and so when they took their land back, then they just been doing 20 years of sanctions, and this nation, to this day, that's why we go, proud people, productive black people. They got their own land. They know their own language. They know their culture and their totems. They teach us about the different totems and what this stuff means. We start reconnecting with our African story. It's marvelous to go back to Africa and you don't see, now we can go walk with the lions and see the elephants. So that is there, but we get this idea you go back to Africa and that's all you, no. We got skyscrapers and buildings and places we can go and markets we can go and find some of the greatest artisanship in the world.
And they're still in touch with their African history.
And they still know that they're African people, and they still fighting, even though they're fighting the designs of Western imperialism with economic sanctions. Even though sometimes they can't get $1 because of what the sanctions are doing with the money.
The inflation.
But guess what? They created false and created inflation. But you want me to tell you what's beautiful? Even with all of that, at 3 o'clock, and I've done this, at 3 a.m. in the morning, by myself, just so happy to be in Africa, I'm just roaming around Zimbabwe. Not one person do harm. I seen a person walk.
With all that poverty and inflation going on, nobody
you ain't got people killing each other, ain't nobody shooting each other. And I'll be honest with you, the civilization in our people over there, I'll be honest, sometimes it kind of embarrasses us. Because I'll be honest with you now. I'm being honest as an African, a black man in America. When I see the things that they deal with, the civilized way they deal with it, I'd be like, we wouldn't do that here. Like, you have
Are elders a part of that decision making?
Elders are part of that decision making.
And is it safe to say that the leadership that's still around to this day, even with the passing of President Mugabe, weren't they a part of that united front?
They were. And
that beat the Europeans?
They were. And what I like is it's not as strong verbally as it was under Baba Mugabe. But the government still is represented by people who physically know the challenge of what it was like to be enslaved.
Yes.
These are still the people who've given the nation back its land. I'm not saying that the government is absolutely perfect, but what I will say is this. They are still represented as a nation by the people who were willing to do whatever was necessary to get freedom for African people. And that's what separates Zimbabwe as a nation that will stand for itself. And I hope it continues to do that. I trust that it will. Because the people who are leading it, not that they're perfect, but they know sacrifice, they've made sacrifices, and they're not willing to bend over because they fought and they know they can win. They know they can win and they've done it before.
Final statements.
Final statements. I haven't been this moved to talk like this in a long time, and I want to say this because, and I'm saying this real, I'm saying because it doesn't happen enough. There are not a lot of men and women that bring this out of me enough. I'm going to say this while I'm saying this too. We're in a time of shallow black manhood, almost an emptiness in manhood. I like being around you because...
Likewise.
Yeah. I'm going to say this because it's important to hear. When people like this are here, we don't look the black man in the face and say, look, black man, I go out here and I fight every day for my race. What gives me a sense of comfort is that I know that there's another black man like that.
Yes,
now, let me say this. I'm being honest. I grew up in Southeast. I don't like police officers. But you and your work, and I ain't talking about what I heard, what I've seen. I've been able to prove it and see what y'all have done. The Brothers 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement, what y'all stand for, I have to put aside my feelings. Y'all are real men and women with character. We don't have people like that today. And I respect that. I want to look you in the eye and tell you I respect that because it's hard out here being a warrior for your people. But it's easier when you know that there are other warriors. So I want to shake your hand and let the people know this is the man you should support. We need more black men like this.
just want to thank you so much for those kind words, and certainly,
truth.
I'm amazed every time I see you dig in and what comes out.
Yes, sir.
Because every time I hear you, the first person I think of, for whatever reason, is Amos Wilson. I think of Francis Quest Welsing. And now, man, wow, man, you started to remind me a lot of Martin Delaney. You got that in you, man, and certainly Dr. Khaled.
Well,
so
man, brother, you just warmed my heart. That's a hard lineup.
Yeah, well, brother, you know, it's fairly obvious that anybody that's around you going to start seeing those various elements is coming out in you. To those who believe in traditional African religions and faith, their ancestors certainly speak through this, brother. And you got to acknowledge that it's not that he had a prepared statement or anything today. The ancestors truly are in this, brother. And you was made for this time. Let me say my statement to you is you were made for this time. I don't think you would have fit in properly in the 60s. During the integration movement. I think you were better suited for after the Black Liberation Movement to remind us of what Black liberation is about, what freedom and equality, and what it takes. You were like that builder comes in, whether it's Con Ed or the gas company, to remind you. You know, they give you a reminder when you don't pay your bills.
Yes, sir.
And you seem to be a reminder, brother, yes, that sir. Freedom ain't free.
That's right.
You're reminded that you're going to have to pay a cost. And you have an information background to say, this is what Desalegn and Bookman and them did. This is what African Americans have to do. You say this is what Chief Crazy Horse and their last stand against Custer.
That's right.
What had to be done. And so this is not a milquetoast, tipping through the tulips type of conversation. So I commend you, brother. I think the ancestors are with you. I think you were called for this time. I don't think you're going to make many friends with the things you talk about.
Yes,
but
sir.
I think certainly even those who might be your detractors, they have to admit that you was made for these times, because they're not going to make those bold statements and do what you do, travel all over the world, and you don't know what's waiting for you when you touch down.
That's right.
You don't know.
You don't.
But you do it anyway, and you've already been barred from Bermuda.
Yes.
So I would just say to you that, brother, stay strong. I believe the ancestors are with you. I believe the creator of the universe is with you on this mission. Even those that disagree have to understand that you're not here lying. Everything you're saying is true, and if you want to fact check him, you see that everything this brother said today is true. That spirit, that Dr. Khaled's spirit is in this brother, and I salute you. I want to certainly say that the control room want to thank you for allowing us this extra time, because it needs to be said what he's saying, and certainly at the same time, black man, black woman, protect the black child. Accept your own and be yourself. Peace and power.